When people imagine ancient power, they picture stone cities, towering walls, permanent capitals carved into the earth: Rome, Chang'an, Constantinople. These places dominate our imagination because they are still visible. They survived earthquakes, invasions, and time itself. We mistake survival for importance. But visibility is not the same as power. Some empires were designed to endure in stone. Others were designed to dominate in motion. For most of human history, the most powerful empires on Earth had none of these monuments. They left no pyramids rising from deserts, no cathedrals scraping the sky, no ruins waiting to be rediscovered centuries later. Instead, they ruled from horseback. Across the Eurasian steppe, vast nomadic empires rose and fell. Empires that controlled more land than Rome ever did, often faster, often more efficiently. They decided which civilizations survived, which trade routes stayed open, which borders expanded, and which collapsed overnight. Their capitals shifted with the seasons. Their borders expanded and contracted like living organisms. Their strength was not fixed to geography, but to speed, coordination, and fear. And yet, when modern history is told, they are barely mentioned. They vanish between chapters. Not because they were weak, not because they lacked organization, not because they failed, but because they moved. And history struggles to remember power that refuses to stand still. The steppe was never empty land. It only looks empty to civilizations that measure power in buildings instead of movement. Stretching from Eastern Europe to East Asia, the Eurasian steppe formed a continuous corridor of grasslands, thousands of miles long, uninterrupted by oceans or mountains, perfect for horses, hostile to farming, deadly to slow, supply-dependent armies. To settled civilizations, the steppe looked barren because it could not be farmed easily. But what it lacked in crops, it made up for in mobility. Grass fed horses, horses fed empires. This single ecological fact reshaped world history. Nomadic empires did not rule through cities. They ruled through mobility, timing, and reach. A steppe army didn't march. It flowed like weather. Each warrior traveled with several horses, switching mounts throughout the day to maintain speed. An army could cross distances in days that took others weeks. A single nomadic warrior could outlast entire infantry units, not through strength, but through endurance. While city armies exhausted themselves hauling food, armor, and siege equipment, steppe forces stayed light, fast, and unpredictable. They carried no supply lines to sabotage, no cities to besiege, no fixed capital to capture. The land itself sustained them. Their weapons were designed for constant motion. The composite bow, laminated from wood, horn, and sinew, stored immense power in a compact frame. It could punch through armor. It could be fired accurately while riding at full gallop, and it outranged most infantry weapons of its time. But technology was only part of the equation. Steppe warfare emphasized intelligence above brute force. Scouting units operated far ahead of the main force. Information moved faster than armies. They used deception as doctrine, feigned retreats, false weaknesses, sudden encirclements. Entire enemy armies collapsed without ever understanding what they were fighting. Defeated generals often described the same sensation, the feeling of fighting an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere at once. This was not chaos. It was operational art perfected over centuries. Settled civilizations called them barbarians. But civilizations do not build massive walls to stop insignificant enemies. The Great Wall of China was not a monument to dominance. It was an admission of vulnerability. Walls were expensive. They consumed enormous labor and resources. Empires only built them when diplomacy failed, and when defeat felt possible. Empires like the Xingnu were not scattered tribes. They were large-scale political confederations with command hierarchies, taxation systems, and long-term strategic planning. They did not simply raid China. They negotiated with it. Chinese dynasties paid annual tribute: silk, grain, silver, livestock, not as generosity, but as insurance. Royal marriages were arranged. Hostages were exchanged. Trade was weaponized. Peace was purchased. Tribute was not humiliation for the nomads. It was acknowledgement. It meant settled states recognized steppe leaders as legitimate rulers, not criminals or outlaws. This recognition terrified court historians, who later rewrote these relationships as appeasement instead of survival. The pattern repeated across Eurasia. Rome struggled against steppe pressure from the north and east. Persia negotiated, bribed, and recruited nomadic forces. Byzantium paid one steppe group to destroy another. When walls failed, and they often did, settled empires adapted. They imported steppe horses. They restructured armies around cavalry. They copied nomadic tactics, command styles, and logistics. Over time, settled empires absorbed nomadic methods so thoroughly that their origins were forgotten. The word barbarian was never a description of reality. It was a political weapon used by societies that could not fully control their most dangerous rivals. The steppe won, and then vanished into its own success. We are taught that the Silk Road was built by merchants. This is one of history's most persistent myths. Merchants do not secure continents. They do not patrol deserts. They do not impose peace across thousands of miles. Empires do. Without protection, trade routes collapse into bandit corridors. Distance becomes danger. Trust disappears. Trade across Eurasia expanded only when steppe empires stabilized the land between civilizations. When nomadic power was strong, caravans moved freely. When it collapsed, routes fractured, banditry surged, and long-distance trade shrank. The clearest example is the Mongol Empire. At its height, it created a single political system stretching from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe. For the first time in history, most of Eurasia operated under one overarching order. This era became known as the Pax Mongolica. The Mongols standardized passports. They built relay stations. They enforced laws that protected merchants regardless of origin. A trader could cross Eurasia carrying silver, silk, or knowledge, and expect protection rather than extortion. This was revolutionary. Merchants traveled under imperial protection. Diplomatic envoys crossed entire continents. Scholars, engineers, and craftsmen were relocated deliberately to where they were needed. Papermaking spread westward. Gunpowder recipes followed military roads. Navigation knowledge crossed cultural boundaries. Medical texts were translated and shared. Even disaster followed these same arteries. The Black Death did not appear randomly. It moved along trade routes stabilized by empire. Connection has consequences. For the first time, humanity experienced truly global cause and effect. Globalization did not begin with ships or steam engines. It began with horses and the empires that mastered them. The steppe empires eventually vanished, but they never truly left. When the steppe empires fell, their people did not disappear. They settled. They intermarried. They became kings, soldiers, farmers, and administrators. Their bloodlines blended invisibly into future states. Languages across Eurasia still carry traces of their expansion, loanwords, sounds, and structures that reveal ancient dominance. Genetic studies show massive population movements linked directly to steppe conquests. Some modern populations carry unusually high concentrations of shared ancestry, evidence of elite dominance, not random migration. Power leaves biological footprints. Many modern borders, especially in Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and East Asia, trace ancient fault lines created by nomadic pressure. Buffer states, frontier zones, strategic corridors contested again and again. Even modern geopolitics becomes clearer through this lens. The obsession with controlling Central Asia, the fear of open plains, the persistence of east-west tension across Eurasia. Maps change slower than people, but people remember. The steppe did not disappear. It was absorbed into the political geography of the modern world. So why is this history missing? Because history favors permanence. Cities leave ruins. Empires leave archives. Nomads leave movement. Historians inherit archives, not motion. What cannot be stored cannot be cited. What cannot be cited is dismissed. Most historical records were written by settled societies, by those who were defeated, taxed, or humiliated by steppe powers. Calling them uncivilized justified defeat. Calling them barbarians erased their legitimacy. This framing was repeated for centuries, until it became truth through repetition. Erasure does not require conspiracy, only neglect. When gunpowder, firearms, and industrial logistics finally neutralized cavalry dominance, the steppe lost its military advantage. Without walls, without permanent capitals, without centralized archives, their empires faded from the historical spotlight, not because they failed, but because the rules of power changed. The modern world was not built by cities alone. It was forged through movement by empires that mastered distance, speed, coordination, and fear long before railroads or satellites. Modern militaries still rely on principles perfected on the steppe: mobility, rapid concentration of force, decentralized command. The steppe teaches a final lesson. Power does not need to be permanent to be decisive. So the next time you look at a map, don't just see borders frozen in place, imagine it moving. Because long before nations stood still, the world was ruled by the thunder of hooves. And history has never fully recovered from forgetting them.